Hello everyone, I'm Jupiter, your friendly neighborhood artist, and welcome back to my channel. I'm assuming this will likely be your first time viewing me, as I've never made a video in this style of content previously. If you scroll through any of my older videos, you'll likely just see animations, like map arts or animation memes, but I thought trying out something new for a change would be fun, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. Today I plan on recapping my whole ARTFIGHT 2025 experience, and I'll be including all of my speed paints in the background as we go too. This year just flew by, and while I'm sure it went by fast for all of you as well, there's still a lot I have to cover, so sit down, get comfortable, grab a snack or your drawing tablet, and let's get into ARTFIGHT 2025! For those of you who aren't familiar with ARTFIGHT, which makes me slightly confused on why you clicked on this video, but oh well. ARTFIGHT is an art gifting/trading game that happens for a month every year starting July 1st. The object of the game is to draw other people's characters in order to earn points for your team, and the team with the greatest number of points at the end of the month wins. The amount of points you earn per attack is calculated through a whole number of bases, such as drawing type, did you do a craft, 3D model, or 2D drawing, how much of the character you included, like did you just include the head of the character, or did you draw their whole body. Other things such as shading, animation, and background will also help you earn more points. You can also draw multiple characters in one attack. This is often referred to as a mass attack. However, I'll go into more detail on my personal opinions of mass attacks later in the video. You also earn more points when drawing attacks for the opposite team. If you plan on attacking someone from the same team, which is referred to as friendly fire, you only end up earning 75% of the points that you'd otherwise earn if they weren't on your team. While at first glance this may seem demotivating to those who want to do friendly fire, in the past years, I believe you'd only end up actually earning somewhere around 25% of the points on friendly fires, so a lot of people were happy when this change was made, since it gives players much more incentive to draw people on the same team as them, rather than just limiting themselves to attacking people on the opposite team because they believe they wouldn't otherwise earn enough points. When you attack someone in ARTFIGHT, they have the ability to attack you back in what is known as a revenge. These don't earn any more or less points than a normal attack would, but it's still fun to continue a revenge chain with someone anyways. Alright, and now that everyone has been briefed on the rules of the game, let's get into what this season ended up looking like. For most people, the fun of ARTFIGHT starts before the event even begins. Since you need to have characters up on your page in order to receive attacks and defenses from others, most artists have to make sure that they have updated reference sheets for their characters. However, a lot of people on ARTFIGHT will do a design me a character thing, where the person attacking them will make them a design as an attack. That, and a lot of people will post their pets as characters for others to draw. This isn't something I did personally, but a lot of people I know did this. In fact, this season there was actually an animal shelter known as Oak Tree Incorporated that submitted the cats they had as characters to their ARTFIGHT page to help grow recognition for their organization and even get their cats adopted. While I didn't end up attacking them, they ended up receiving a whopping 1,056 attacks this year alone, which is absolutely wild. I think having an animal shelter participate in ARTFIGHT is such an amazing way to advertise your organization, and I'm sure a lot of people either donated to them or adopted some of their cats because of their participation this season. Back to talking about posting characters for ARTFIGHT. This year I ended up going through and archiving a lot of my older characters that I just didn't feel much attachment to anymore. I remember having probably around 40 characters last year, and I ended up cutting that down to only around 9 characters in use this year. The reason I did this is because I only really wanted to receive art of the characters that I felt most attached to. If I prefer to receive art of one character over art of a character that I hardly ever use, then I don't see why I should give people the option to draw a character I'm hardly even attached to in the first place. This is not to say that I wouldn't appreciate the art that I'd receive of these characters. I genuinely appreciate all the attacks I get, and I cherish and love each and every single piece that I receive. This was just for me personally. Although, after my experience this year, I do believe that the more characters you have, the more likely it'll be for you to receive an attack. Last year I made less attacks, but I ended up receiving more defenses last year than I did this year, and I personally believe this is just because I had less characters on display this year. So if you are interested in getting the most attacks on you as possible, I highly recommend having a variety of characters for artists to choose from. A cool part about ARTFIGHT is that you can add characters to your page whenever you'd like, whether that's outside the event and even during the event itself. So while you aren't required to cram in all your reference sheet making to the month before the event starts, this is often what a lot of us end up doing. I believe I ended up making my own reference sheet somewhere between May and June, not because of ARTFIGHT. I was just interested in designing some new characters for a story I'm working on. During the last week of June, we finally got the teams for this year after what seemed like ages of waiting. I didn't do any voting on what teams I wanted there to be this year because honestly, I was fine with any of the options that they gave us. Although I do have to say, I felt like Crystals versus Fossils kind of felt like an underwhelming pick in my opinion. I just feel like there would have been a lot of other options that could have been more interesting. But now that the season is finally over, I can definitely see why they ended up choosing these teams. Throughout this entire season, it has basically been a 50-50 between which team has the most points. This completely shocked me because I had never seen anything like this in any of the prior ARTFIGHT seasons. And I was gonna talk about which team won, but while I'm editing this script, the winners of the season have still yet to be released. If they are released by the time I'm editing this, here's the winner, I guess. I think having the winner for this year be such a close call really goes to show just the amount of effort that both teams put into trying to rack up as many points as they could before the season was over. It just made the game so much more competitive and fun, and it really helped keep my motivation up until the very end. I remember last ARTFIGHT season basically just giving up towards the end because I knew I wouldn't be able to get enough points to make any impact on whether or not my team would win or lose. Although I'm aware in such a big event like ARTFIGHT, there's only a small amount an individual can do to shift the final scores. A couple of points for your team doesn't really matter when there's millions being counted. To continue on, once the teams were released before the event started, we also got the design of the cards as well. These cards are used to help artists showcase what characters they have, and also share if they'll do revenges and friendly fire. These images are put up on the front page of an artist's ARTFIGHT profile, so whoever is interested in attacking them can take a quick glance to see if any of their characters interest them. Plus, if you want to know if an artist you're attacking does friendly fire or revenges, it's good to check out their card. Although making a card isn't required for you to participate in the game, it's always a fun part of the week leading up to the event in my opinion. Finally, on the few days before the game starts, it's always good to look through all the people you want to attack first and bookmark their characters and save their reference sheets. It's good to save reference sheets before the game starts since, while you aren't technically allowed to start making attacks before the event starts, as that's against the rules and your attack can be taken down if that's found out, it's good to have a few references on hand for when the event starts since every year the site crashes for the first few hours of the event due to the sheer amount of people logging in and trying to find characters to attack. So to save the hassle and annoyance of a broken site, I suggest saving some of the characters you want to do beforehand. Waiting for the event to start before making an attack is always such a struggle. Everyone is so hyped up the few days before the event, and I know I was just itching to start making attacks. The problem with ARTFIGHT for me this year is that I knew I was going to be working throughout all the weeks that the event was going on, and that the only times I would have to draw were in early mornings before work, as well as the nights when I came home from work. Despite knowing I had this setback, I ended up making the goal for myself to make a total of 30 attacks this ARTFIGHT season. That means that I'd basically have to make one attack a day in order to reach my goal. Now, you might be asking yourself if I was able to reach this goal, and the answer is yes. I ended up drawing a total of 32 attacks this year, which was actually 2 more than I anticipated. I'm quite proud of being able to reach this goal, and I find it kind of shocking that I did, especially considering the amount that I had on. Last year I did not reach any goals that I had, so being able to do it this year was just a lot of fun. I think the thing that us artists struggle with the most during the ARTFIGHT season is keeping a consistent motivation throughout the whole event. I feel as though a lot of people struggle to finish more attacks as the end of the event draws nearer, while it felt like they were creating much more art at the beginning of the event. I honestly shockingly didn't really have a huge problem with finding the motivation to draw, although there were a few times when I had to abandon attacks that I didn't like. which was definitely a little demotivating, and I will get into the rest of that later. What really helped me stay motivated throughout the event was just trying to avoid burnout. Obviously, since I was working, it wasn't like I was spending every waking hour drawing, like some artists will for this event. This definitely helped me avoid getting burnt out. Also, having specific times of the day that were basically dedicated to me drawing was helpful. This being, like I said earlier, the morning before work, as well as the afternoon after I got home. I also never let drawing attacks impede on my sleep at night, which was definitely helpful for managing my tiredness. I know a lot of artists get their motivation to draw at night, but for me personally, I feel like I just work better in the morning. If you feel like you work better at night, then go for it, but for me personally, that just doesn't work out. I think the key is just to find the right time that works for you, and you know you will have the most motivation and won't be stressed out by just the mere thought of making another attack. Another thing that was super helpful in my creation of attacks this year was actually Pinterest. Trust me, if I didn't have access to all those references and backgrounds, I never would have been able to make it through the event without crashing out severely. The amount of different poses and drawings and backgrounds on there are just so helpful, especially when you're not sure how you want to start an attack. What I would do if I knew I wanted to attack a character, but I didn't have any real ideas for how I would want to go about it, then I'd go on Pinterest and scroll through until I found a couple of ideas that I thought would work. In fact, the drawing that I have playing in the background right now was actually inspired by this image I found on Pinterest for the pose. I know a lot of you might be thinking that this is quote-unquote cheating, but in my opinion, as long as you aren't tracing and just using it as inspiration for your piece, not copying every single detail about it, then there's nothing wrong with this practice, especially if it helps you draw more and potentially improves your art. Talking about art improvement, let's get into my next goal for this season, which was just to make some more complex drawings like scenes and full bodies. The drawing currently playing in the background is an example of what I mean by more complex. I think one thing us character and OC artists struggle the most with tends to be backgrounds. What I really wanted to do this year was try and make backgrounds that were more fun for me, since it was always demotivating for me in the past to do backgrounds. Developing my style in general this year was a huge goal of mine too. I remember last year making a lot of digital paintings for the ARTFIGHT season, and the only real reason I did this was because I honestly thought they'd just make me a better artist, and that I'd have to know how to paint in order to be a quote-unquote good artist. Looking back, this mentality was definitely flawed. Despite the fact that I didn't make any digitally painted attacks this year, I still feel like I was able to improve as an artist, especially compared to some of the other attacks I made last year. And even not in regards to improvement, I feel like I just generally enjoyed the art making process much more than I did last year, and in general avoided much more burnout than I did last year because I was able to draw things that didn't cause me stress. You might be thinking that this is a contradiction to my point earlier about saying that I wanted to draw more backgrounds despite not being the hugest fan of them, but the difference between the two is that I wanted to find a way to be able to make backgrounds that didn't stress me out. In the past, I've always really drawn backgrounds through painting in a more detailed rendering style, but this year I tried to make backgrounds that I felt fit my style more, and that used a more similar cel-shading techniques that are present in my character art as well. I feel like this generally made it a lot easier for me to stay motivated on these larger, complex attacks, knowing that I didn't want to throw myself out a window for daring to draw a single background. And while I still may not be the biggest fan of any of my background drawings, at least I don't want to die over making a background that I hate even more and that hardly matches my style in the first place. However, I did end up drawing one painted background this year despite all my rants on how I personally don't enjoy making them. And this was for an animation attack, the one animation attack that I ended up finishing this year. And I specify finishing because I tried to make another animation attack but ended up failing miserably. The animation that you're seeing me draw right now is just a simple GIF, and I'll have it playing on screen for a bit just so you can see what the final product ended up looking like. Animating was honestly a huge struggle for me this season, since I just didn't have the motivation to animate like I used to. If you look back on my channel, it's filled with animations, Practically the only thing I've posted up until today have been either multi-animator project parts or animation memes, like I said earlier. Generally, I do enjoy animating, but the time-consuming process is definitely not meant for ARTFIGHT attacks in my opinion. In case you're curious, all the art including this animation I made were all done on Procreate, not Procreate Dreams. I've been using Procreate consistently for I believe 4 years? That's crazy. Before I started using Procreate, I used Ibis Paint and Flip-a-Clip, but eventually stopped it in favor of using Procreate for my art. However, I would like to note that I don't usually animate on Procreate. In fact, I usually do it on ToonSquid. Alright, now that I have discussed my softwares, I believe it's time to get back on topic. I feel like ARTFIGHT should be giving more points to the animated attacks compared to what they are currently. The animation you see me working on now took me about 3.5 hours, and it only ended up earning me about 147 points. And it wasn't even a friendly fire. Compare that to this drawing on screen, which only took me about 2 hours and 45 minutes, which is still a long time, but ended up receiving 169 points, which was even more than the animation received, but for less the amount of time. I know this is probably a stupid complaint, but I always feel demotivated to work on a big animation attack for ARTFIGHT because I know they aren't going to receive as many points as they otherwise would. Going back to the animation meme attack I was talking about earlier, I ended up not completing it because it was just taking so much time, and I ended up losing motivation for it due to some of the reasons I mentioned earlier. I also just really didn't like how this animation was coming out. I was doing it in a style that was more chibi compared to the one that I usually draw in, because I wanted to try out a new style and thought it would make the process easier, but in all honesty, it definitely did not. I feel bad for abandoning this project, but I'm also glad I didn't finish it, since I think forcing myself to waste time on something I don't enjoy is just so demotivating to the whole ARTFIGHT experience. I spent, I believe, 2 to 3 days working on this, and I didn't even get halfway done. If I were more than halfway done with this animation, I think it'd be more likely that I'd just pull through and force myself to finish it despite not liking the end product. But since I wasn't even halfway done, I just decided, fuck it, I'm not finishing this. Another reason I didn't end up finishing it is because, honestly, I'm not a huge fan of making mass attacks. I think mass attacks are helpful if you want to revenge a lot of people at once and want to do it all in one attack, or if you want to earn a bunch of points for your team. But honestly, outside of that, I'm just not a huge fan of them. I just feel as though mass attacks can end up being a lot more impersonal than normal attacks and are often just made to earn more points. I do, however, understand that the point of the game is to earn the most amount of points as possible. However, there are many cases of mass attacks being made in the past that have had such little effort put in that you can't even distinguish any of the characters in the piece. The ARTFIGHT team does make a great effort to go through and take down any of the attacks like this that might break the rules. And this isn't to say that mass attacks are bad by any means. I love receiving any kind of attack, even if they are a mass attack. And if you like making mass attacks, then go for it. But I just don't think that a mass attack can ever be as personal as an individual one would be in comparison. Okay, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe if you're doing a mass attack with like all your friends in it, that could be more personal. But if you're just pushing a bunch of random characters in together, then it likely won't be. I'm sure a lot of you, like me, have your own experience with not being able to finish attacks. I think a common experience in ARTFIGHT is not being able to finish a revenge for a person because you just can't find a character that you personally want to draw from them. However, this isn't really an experience I had this year, despite me putting in the effort of revenging everyone who attacked me. I'd like to note that although I made it a goal of mine to revenge all of the attacks I received, this definitely is not a mandatory in ARTFIGHT. The only real reason I did this was because I knew I was likely only going to receive attacks from friends and other online artists that I run in similar circles with. Honestly, it's actually a really nice privilege being able to revenge all the attacks I receive, because it allows me to show all my appreciation to all the artists who spent their free time making art for me. The reason I say this is a privilege is because many people, such as artists who are more popular, aren't able to revenge many of their attacks just due to the sheer quantity of them that they receive. This is one part of art fight culture that I've definitely seen people complaining about in the past, where they feel like they're obligated to be receiving revenges for all the attacks they make, or feel obligated to receive comments on all the attacks they make for other artists. I'm mainly saying this in regards to artists who receive a lot of attacks, since some people will receive so many that they physically can't spend hours of their day going through every attack and writing a comment on all of them. I'm also pretty sure that ARTFIGHT only lets you post so many comments in a short amount of time to avoid spamming, which just makes it even harder for these larger artists to comment on all the attacks they receive. I do believe that receiving a comment thanking you for the art you made is nice, and that if you have the ability to comment on the attacks you receive, then you should, but technically this isn't a rule, and no one is obligated to comment on your attacks, let alone revenge them. Also, just because you didn't receive a comment does not mean that the artist you drew for didn't see and appreciate your work. It's much more likely that they just spent the time appreciating your work in silence and didn't have the time to post a public comment on your piece. For example, the artwork I have playing in the background right now is for an artist I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, who is known here on YouTube as Jinja Ninja OWO. While I wanted to make an art piece for them to show my appreciation for their work and content, I also acknowledge that they are incredibly busy and have over 1 million followers and receive hundreds of attacks. Personally, I didn't expect that I would be receiving a comment on this attack that I made for them. Another example of me not receiving a comment on an attack I made was for this piece here. This was actually revenge against someone who made an attack for me, which I appreciate very much. The reason I believe that they weren't able to respond to my attack was because this person created thousands of attacks this year, and they were likely receiving hundreds of revenges as a response. This is just meant to show another reason why someone may not be commenting on your attack. If you're someone who gets really upset by not receiving comments on your attacks, then I highly recommend sticking with just attacking friends and other small artists that you run in similar circles with, since they're more likely to comment on your attacks and are much more likely to revenge you compared to bigger artists. Plus, I feel like the whole community aspect of the game just makes it even more enjoyable. Being able to make new artist friends and have long revenge chains with either new artists or ones you've been drawing with for years is much more fun in my opinion than just drawing for big artists and hoping one will eventually notice you. Of course, this doesn't mean you can't show your appreciation for artists you enjoy. If I said that, then I'd be a hypocrite. But I feel like the community aspect of ARTFIGHT is much more important than just the gifting part of the game. Now, I believe it's time for me to mention the hardest part of ARTFIGHT, and just the hardest part of drawing in general, the dreaded art block. If you somehow do not know what art block is, it is when an artist's motivation tends to be the lowest, usually because they feel like all the art they create looks bad or doesn't fit their standards. My art block hit me towards the end of the event this year, as it usually does. While this art block was definitely a struggle, I knew that if I wanted to reach my goal of 30 attacks, then I'd need to find some workaround, especially with the 2 to 3 day setback of the animation attack that I never ended up finishing. Some things that I do personally to relieve art block is trying out different styles. The drawing I'm making in the background right now is an example of that. For this one, I wanted to try a style that's generally more chibi than I usually draw. You don't have to try out styles that are insanely different from your normal art, but just try to draw in a style that you think looks cool. Maybe find an artist you really like and try to replicate a piece in their style. Of course, if you're copying directly from an artist, it's always good to give them credit if you do end up posting the art somewhere, so just keep that in mind. Tracing can even be helpful for you to understand the general shapes and anatomy. In art block, we often feel like our art isn't up to our own standards, which means it's usually a good time to go back to the basics of things like anatomy. I know tracing is generally seen as taboo in the art community, but if you're just doing it to help improve your art and not posting it anywhere, it's usually fine, so I suggest giving that a go. And of course, I do not recommend forcing yourself to make super fully rendered detailed pieces if you're not motivated to, but even just making a little sketch is helpful to get out of art block. Honestly, just finding something new that you find fun to draw is generally super helpful. That is where Pinterest again comes in clutch for me. If I'm super demotivated, pulling up Pinterest and just scrolling through definitely helps. After pulling through this little art block rut, I definitely start to notice some places in my art where I'd like to either improve on or just experiment with. The first thing that I wanted to experiment with in my art was my shading style. Something I had come to learn about the art that I enjoy making over the past few months is that I prefer cell shading over any other kind of shading. What I mainly use for all my art is a bit of a mix between cell shading and some airbrush shading. Which, before you get mad at me for using the dreaded airbrush tool to shade, just hear me out. I mainly use airbrush shading to create some softer shadows in areas that are exposed to less light. I usually use the airbrush tool over places that I've already cell shaded to give the shading more of a softer look, and I feel it helps flow the dark parts of the shading into the lighter areas. I've also been taking advantage of the smudge tool. I like to smudge areas that I've already cell shaded that don't need much of a strong contrast between the light and dark. Hopefully this is relatively easy for you all to understand. Another method of shading that I have developed during the art fight season is that I will do my darker shaded areas under the line art, but I will do my lighting over the line art. This is because I like to have line art a lighter color in areas that experience the most amount of lighting, but I don't really want that for my shading. The second thing I wanted to experiment with in my art this season was my line art. I've gone through a bunch of different line art styles in the past, and just recently have been trying to find one that I think fits the most with my style. I find looking at other people's art really helps me with this, as there are so many different styles and ways that people do their line art. Some people like weighted lines, some don't, some like thinner lines, some like thicker lines, and some people don't even use line art. What I wanted to do was to find a brush that I enjoyed using, and that was weighted well. I also experimented a little with having thinner lines on the inside of my drawing, while having much thicker lines on the outside. The piece you see playing in the background right now is a prime example of some of the experimentation I did. This piece not only was to help me with my line art and shading, but was also made as a study of canine jaws. Closer to the end of the art fight season, I'd say within the last few days, I also decided to try out the lasso tool technique for line art and coloring. If you aren't aware of this technique, it has become quite popular on TikTok and just in general, since it's an easy way to create lines that appear to be weighted, even if you don't have access to a stylus. As someone who works with an Apple Pencil on Procreate, I'm definitely not the target audience for the style, but I've always found it super interesting, so I wanted to give it a try. The speed paint that I'm featuring right now is actually an example of me trying this style out. Now that I've tested this style, I'm not super sure if I want to keep using it in my art or not. Sure, it was fun to try, but generally there's not really a benefit for me doing this over my normal line art and coloring style. The lasso tool style takes me about the same amount of time as my normal art, and like I said earlier, I have an Apple Pencil, so it's not like I don't have access to pressure sensitivity already. I'm also aware that this could be due to the fact that I was using this method in Procreate, when most artists will typically be using this method in Ibis Paint. Maybe one day I'll give it a try in Ibis Paint and let you guys know if there's a huge difference, but yeah, I think for now I'll be sticking with my normal line art style, since that's just what I'm used to. In general, I think Art Fight is such a great time to experiment and try out new art techniques you otherwise would never have tried. If you didn't spend as much time experimenting with your art this season, I highly recommend giving it a shot next season, as it's super helpful to finding your style and improving your art. Alright, now that I've gone over everything I think I wanted to cover this season, I just wanted to thank everyone who attacked me this year. Everyone's art is genuinely so amazing, and I absolutely loved participating this year. I genuinely appreciate this community so much, and I know I wouldn't be this far on my art journey without every single one of you supporting me along the way. It does genuinely mean the world to have such a great community of artists, and watching everyone improve these past few years of participating in Art Fight has genuinely been such a joy for me. I'm also so grateful to the Art Fight team and anyone who supports the Art Fight website. This event wouldn't be able to happen if it weren't for them, and I wouldn't be able to make all these incredible memories and have such a fun experience without them. I highly recommend donating to the Art Fight website if you can, as these events wouldn't be able to happen otherwise. I also think there's some keychains and stickers you can buy to support them too. And if you'd like to support me, I highly recommend liking, commenting, and subscribing if you enjoyed. Feel free to tell me how your art fight experience was. If you did participate, was it your first year? How many attacks did you end up making? Did you receive any unexpected attacks or revenges this year? I'd love to hear all of your own experiences down in the comments below. I'd also love if you had any video recommendations for me, as this is my first time trying out this style of content. Constructive criticism is greatly appreciated. Finally, if you like my art and want to support me financially, my commissions are open for what I'd like to believe is generally a cheap price, so if any of you are interested, please consider commissioning me. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I had such a good time this art fight season, and I can't wait for the next season, even if it is a year away. I hope you all had a great day, and remember to treat yourself kindly. Alright, bye!